Hey there, welcome back. This is the third and final part of our videos for chapter 19. This section is all about the extension of European power. So those of you that like to have page numbers to follow along, I'm going to be starting on page 430 of your book. So let's go ahead and share some slides here. All right, here we go. So last little bit of notes for this chapter. There is one more section that I'm going to have you kind of look at a little bit tomorrow, but this is the last one that we're going to do a video for. So extension of European power. So some of the things we need to pay attention to today are what are the reasons for European expansion and imperialism? What were some of the events of the imperialist era and their consequences? What were some of the missionary activities of William Carey, Hudson Taylor, David Livingstone, some of those guys? So that's what we're going to be looking at. Well, let's dive on in. So, reasons for imperialism. Um, Oftentimes, European countries saw colonies as a source of wealth. We talked quite a bit previously about this idea of mercantilism and how countries basically wanted to get as much gold and silver as they possibly could. And so they used their colonies as a way to do that. Many European countries practice this imperialism, which, if you don't know the definition, basically it means an extension of power by one people or country over another country. And so, kind of becoming the dominant power and asserting your power and authority over what you view to be kind of a weaker nation. So all of this empire building eventually leads us into World War I, which we'll get to in the very next chapter. So some regions of imperialism, we're going to be looking at Asia, India, and some other areas of the world. So India came under British control. There were a couple different rebellions. One of them that's pretty well known is the Sepoy Rebellion, where native Indian troops revolted um, against the British, but it really kind of backfired and resulted in even more British control over the country of India. In China, we have the Opium Wars, and that resulted in more trading ports being opened and the British gaining control of Hong Kong. And by the way, I'm giving you like the brief summary of what these things are. Okay, they're a lot more detailed and a lot more complicated, but this is just kind of skimming over the top of the surface just so that you have a little bit of a reference as to what these different events are. Okay. So in Japan, Matthew Perry was sent there, and he helped open up Japan to trade with other nations. The Russo-Japanese War showed that Japan was really becoming more of a powerful country. Japan really kind of surprised Western powers by defeating the mighty Russians. They defeated them both on land and sea, so that's kind of a big deal. And this tiny island nation was able to defeat a much larger opponent and really kind of show themselves as a world power during this time. Okay, over in Southeast Asia, many islands came under European control because these islands are rich in natural resources, things like rubber trees, tea, lead, sapphires, all these things that these European countries thought that they could make a lot of money off of. All right, so moving into Africa. Okay, obviously the slave trade was a big part of that, using Africans to work on plantations, in mines, basically in heavy labor jobs over in the New World. Okay. David Livingstone traveled into the interior of Africa, really opened that up, preached to a lot of natives there, and worked very hard to end the slave trade. Played a really big role in all of that. Your book has a whole section on him on page 437. He's a very interesting guy. And then lastly, for this little section here, the partitioning of Africa, many countries wanted a piece of that pie, so to speak. And so countries like Great Britain, Belgium, Germany, all wanted to colonize and all wanted to have a part of that. Your book has a really good map um, on what that looks like on page 439. You can see all the different colors there of the African nations that were divided up. All right, so the region of imperialism in the Balkans and the Near East. This comes on 440, 441. So Russia wanted to control a large area from the Black Sea all the way down to the Mediterranean. So kind of take over that whole region there, but they were forced to back down. They also wanted to expand toward the Persian Gulf because that area is rich in resources, and if they could get their hands on some of that oil, they would be set for life. So their action resulted in the Anglo-Russian Entente, where Iran was divided into 3 separate zones, where the British controlled part of it, Russia, and then there was like a neutral zone kind of in the middle there. Okay, so what are some of the results of this time period? We've talked about a lot of different nations, different countries involved, but we're definitely headed toward a world conflict here. So some of the results on the negative side, oftentimes this greed led to the exploitation of native peoples that were already living in these lands in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America. Tribal boundaries were not at all respected. And many natives really resented having Western culture imposed upon them. They had been living without that for hundreds of years, so it's easy to see why they would be a little resentful. On the positive side, God's word was spread to many people who hadn't ever heard it before. Schools, hospitals, other public buildings were built by a lot of these missionaries and different groups that went in. So making a big difference there. The schools, colleges, teaching people trades, opening orphanages, beginning hospitals, medical clinics, helping to eliminate some of the superstitious customs that were dangerous to people's lives. Developing written languages for these people, translating the Bible into their language, working to abolish the slave trade, really becoming advocates of human life. So thanks for watching. I know this was a really quick overview of imperialism, but hope you're having a good day, and we'll catch you all later. Bye.